He grabbed her arm in the middle of the clinic waiting room, fingers digging in hard enough to leave marks, and every head turned. "You thought you could hide from me?" Kang Min-jae's voice was quiet. That was the worst part. Not the grip, the quiet. The kind of quiet that meant he had already decided something, and no one in that room was going to stop it. Amara Bennett didn't scream. She looked down at his hand on her arm, then up at his face, and said nothing. Because what do you say to the man you ran from 6 months ago? The man whose empire was built on silence and fear, when he is standing in a women's clinic and staring at the swell of your belly like it just answered every question he'd been carrying? He wasn't supposed to find her. That was the whole point. If this story is hitting you somewhere deep, stay with us. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss what comes next. Hit that like button and drop your city or country in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. The morning Amara's life split in two began the way most catastrophic mornings do. Ordinary. She woke at 6:15, not because an alarm told her to, because the baby had decided 6:15 was an excellent time to press against her lower back with what felt like both feet and a personal agenda. She lay still for a moment with one hand flat on her stomach, breathing through it, waiting for him to settle. He didn't. He rarely did. "Okay," she said to the ceiling. "Okay, I'm up." She had stopped talking to herself out loud around month 4, when she realized she'd started answering back in her head using a voice that wasn't hers. She'd caught herself doing it once in the middle of a grocery store, muttering about whether she needed more iron-rich food, and a woman in the cereal aisle had given her a look that said everything about the particular loneliness of a pregnant woman shopping alone. She wasn't lonely. She told herself that regularly. The apartment was small. 2 rooms, a narrow kitchen, a bathroom where the hot water took 4 minutes to arrive if you ran it correctly, a specific angle on the handle, a patience you had to develop. She had learned the patience. She had learned a lot of things in 6 months that she hadn't expected to need. New name, new neighborhood, new routine. She was Maya Chen on her lease agreement, on the clinic intake forms, on the name tag she wore at the small translation firm where she worked 3 days a week, converting English legal documents into Korean for a fee that covered her rent and a modest amount of food and not much else. She had chosen Maya because it was close enough to Amara that she wouldn't miss it when someone called her name, but different enough to feel like armor. Chen because no one would look twice at it in this neighborhood, which was the kind of neighborhood that asked no questions and offered no favors, which suited her perfectly. She showered, dressed in the one pair of maternity jeans she owned that still fit comfortably, and pulled on a navy sweater that had once been oversized and now fit like it was tailored for her stomach. She ate half a bowl of rice with a fried egg and drank a glass of water slowly, standing at the kitchen counter, watching the street below through a window that had a crack in the upper left corner. She kept meaning to report to her landlord and kept not reporting because every conversation with her landlord was one more person who might remember her face. The clinic appointment was at 9. Dr. Park was thorough and not unkind and had stopped asking about the father after the second visit, which was the most generous professional courtesy Amara had ever been extended. She took the bus. 40 minutes. She sat near the back, one hand in her bag, thumb running over the edge of her phone like she was checking it was still there. She had 3 contacts saved. Her mother, who didn't know the whole truth and was under strict instructions not to call anyone who asked about her daughter. A woman from the translation firm named Soo Jin, who was friendly in the way of someone who sensed you needed space and respected it, and a number that wasn't labeled anything, just a string of digits she'd memorized and saved as a contingency, a number she had never dialed and hoped she never would. She had left her old phone in a trash can at Incheon Airport 6 months ago. She had bought this one with cash. She was careful. She had been careful every single day. She had not been careful enough. The clinic waiting room smelled like antiseptic and the faint sweetness of the hand cream the receptionist used. Amara signed in, Maya Chen, 9 o'clock, and took a seat near the window, away from the door, which was habit now, positioning herself where she could see who came in before they saw her. There were 4 other women waiting, one older woman reading a magazine, 2 younger women who seemed to be together, speaking quietly. One woman, Amara's age, who was staring at her phone with the concentration of someone trying very hard not to cry. Amara knew that concentration. She'd worn it for weeks. She had just pulled out the small notebook she carried. She'd been writing things down, Not a diary exactly. More like letters to her son that she'd never send, just words she needed to put somewhere outside her own skull. When the door opened, she didn't look up immediately. That was the thing about being careful. You develop a rhythm. Door opens, count to 2, then look. Most of the time it's nothing. Most of the time you feel slightly foolish. You do it anyway because the 2 times out of 100 it matters are the times that change everything. She counted to 2. She looked up, and the notebook slid from her hands. Kang Min-jae stood in the doorway of the clinic in a dark coat, no tie. His jaw set in that particular way she'd spent a year learning. The expression that meant he had already decided something and was now simply executing the decision. He was not alone. 2 men flanked him outside the door, visible through the glass. She didn't look at them. She looked at him. He had found her. The thought arrived flat, without panic, which was worse than panic. Panic was useful. This feeling, this cold settling into her chest, was the feeling of something she had known was possible finally becoming real. His eyes went to her face first, then dropped. She watched his expression change. In her entire time with him, 1 year, 4 months, 11 days, though she'd long since stopped counting, she had seen Min-jae surprised exactly twice. Once when she'd argued back at him in front of his entire senior staff and won the argument. Once when she'd told him she loved him and he'd gone completely still, like someone had removed the batteries from him temporarily. This was a 3rd time. He looked at her stomach like a man who'd been handed information that was rearranging everything he thought he understood about the last 6 months. She stood up. The room had gone very still. Not visibly. The receptionist was still typing. The older woman was still reading her magazine. But Amara felt the stillness the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm. The 2 women who'd been talking quietly had stopped. Min-jae crossed the room in 8 steps. She counted those too. She was always counting things that didn't matter when her brain refused to process the things that did. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could have reached out and touched him. She didn't. Amara, he said. Not Maya. Amara. Her real name in his mouth, in this room where she was someone else, landed like something physical. Don't, she said. How long? Wasn't a question. His voice was low and very controlled, which she recognized as the precursor to something breaking loose. Don't do this here. How long have you known? Min-jae, how long? His hand came up and wrapped around her arm just below the elbow. Not violent, but absolute. The grip of someone who had spent his entire adult life ensuring that things he needed to hold stayed held. You left in February. He stopped. She watched him calculate. Watched something move through his eyes that she couldn't name. You knew before you left. She didn't answer. Her silence was its own answer. Why didn't you tell me? His voice cracked on the last word. Just slightly. Just enough. The older woman with the magazine had put it down. The receptionist had stopped typing. Let go of my arm, Amara said quietly. I will walk outside with you and we will talk, but you will let go of my arm. He looked at his hand like he'd forgotten it was there. Released her. She picked up her bag. Her notebook was still on the floor. She left it. She walked to the receptionist's desk and said, I need to reschedule, and didn't wait for a response. Outside, the November air hit her face like a correction. She walked past the 2 men in dark coats without looking at them, stopped at the edge of the sidewalk, and turned around. Min-jae was 3 steps behind her. How did you find me? She said. It doesn't matter. It matters to me. He studied her face. He had always done that. Looked at her like he was reading something in her expression that she didn't know she was writing. Your mother called your aunt in Busan. Your aunt mentioned you'd been seen in Mapo. I had someone check the clinic registrations in this district for women in your description. He paused. It took longer than it should have. You were careful. Not careful enough. No. She turned away from him, looked at the street. A delivery motorcycle passed. A woman walked by holding a child's hand. Normal life, indifferent to whatever was happening on this particular square of sidewalk. How many months? He said. 7. Another silence. She heard him exhale slowly. It's a boy, she said, because she didn't know why she said it except that it was true, and she was tired of holding all of it by herself. She heard him make a sound, not a word. just a sound that came from somewhere that had nothing to do with the Qing Empire or the cold authority or any of the things that had made her run. Why didn't you tell me? He came around to stand where she had to look at him. His eyes were red-rimmed. Kang Min-jae, who had faced down prosecutors and rival crime organizations and the kind of men who made other men disappear, was standing on a sidewalk outside a women's clinic with red-rimmed eyes. Before you left. After you left. Why didn't you tell me, Amara? Because I found the files. The words sat between them. She watched his face understand what she meant. The documents she'd found on the private server she was never meant to access. The ledgers. The names of people who had been ruined, or worse, because the Kong organization needed them to be. The operational records of an empire built so cleanly on the surface and so brutally underneath that the contrast had made her physically ill. I know what you are, she said. I know what your family built. I know what it costs. And I decided... Her voice was steady. She'd rehearsed this moment in her head 100 times. Not because she expected it to happen, but because she needed to know she could survive it if it did. I decided that my son would not be born into that he would not grow up with armed men outside his door and the knowledge that his father's wealth came from other people's suffering. Minji was quiet. You don't deny it, she said. No. You're not going to tell me I misunderstood what I read. No. She looked at him, searching for the performance, the tactical withdrawal, the way he used silence as leverage. She'd seen him do it to other people. She was waiting for it to happen to her. It didn't. What she saw instead was a man standing in the cold without his armor on, and she wasn't sure what to do with that. I need to get to my appointment, she said. You walked out. I'll reschedule. She shifted the strap of her bag on her shoulder. I don't know how you found me, and I don't know what you intend to do with that information, but I want you to understand something clearly. She stepped closer to him, close enough that she was looking up to meet his eyes, close enough that she could see the tiredness in his face that hadn't been there a year ago. I am not going back. Not to you. Not to that life. Not to any version of what we had. My son will know who his father is when he's old enough to understand, and that will be his choice to make. But you do not get to walk back into my life because you found me. You don't get that. He stood very still. Are you finished? He said. Yes. I'm not here to take you back. His voice had changed, lower, something stripped of its usual control. I'm not here to argue or threaten or negotiate. I'm here because... He stopped, pressed his mouth together like he was deciding something. Because I've been looking for you for 6 months and I needed to know you were alive. And now I see that you are alive and you are... His jaw tightened. I needed to see it. The wind moved down the street. Neither of them spoke. You should go back inside, he said finally. It's cold. She stared at him. That's it? For today. Min-jae. Go finish your... Amara. He said her name like he was being careful with it, like it was something he didn't trust himself not to break. I'll be here when you come out. She thought about telling him not to be. She thought about a lot of things in the approximately 4 seconds she stood there looking at him. She went back inside. Her hands were shaking by the time she reached the reception desk. The young woman behind the counter looked at her with the professional blankness of someone who had seen women come back through that door in various states of distress and had learned not to comment on it. I still need my appointment, Amara said, if Dr. Park is still available. She is. It'll be a few minutes. That's fine. She sat back down. The notebook was still on the floor where she'd dropped it. She picked it up, smoothed the cover, held it against her chest. She did not look out the window. She looked anyway. He was still there, standing on the sidewalk with his hands in his coat pockets, facing the street, not watching the door. The two men behind him were speaking to each other quietly. Min-jae was simply standing, present and waiting in the way of someone who had decided to wait and did not intend to be moved from that decision. She had spent 6 months constructing a life around his absence, around the idea of him as something she had survived rather than something she had lost. She pressed her hand to her stomach. Her son shifted, that slow underwater movement she'd come to read like a language. She didn't know if he was reacting to her heart rate or her body temperature or just the ordinary mystery of existing in a small space and moving because he could. I know, she said under her breath. so quiet no one could have heard it. I know. She didn't know what she meant by it. She said it anyway. Dr. Park's nurse appeared in the doorway. Maya Chen? Amara stood. She did not look out the window again. She was lying to herself, and she was aware of that. She had always been aware of her own lies. It was one of the things she hated most about herself. Not the lies exactly, but the clarity with which she could see them and the fact that she kept telling them anyway. The ultrasound room was dim and warm. Dr. Park was businesslike in the way that Amara had come to find deeply comforting. No excess sympathy, no performative concern, just the focused competence of someone doing their job well. Everything looks good, Dr. Park said, moving the transducer across Amara's stomach. He's in a good position. Weight is appropriate. You've been eating? As much as I can. Sleeping? Some. Dr. Park gave her a look that communicated skepticism without judgment. Your blood pressure is slightly elevated today. Is there something going on? I ran into someone I didn't expect to see. Dr. Park returned her attention to the monitor. Try to rest this afternoon. Stress at this stage isn't... I know. I'm going to tell you anyway. Amara stared at the monitor. Her son's heartbeat played through the small speaker in the steady percussion she'd been listening to for months. In the very beginning, before she'd gotten used to it, she'd cried every time she heard it. Not from happiness exactly. From the reality of it. The realness of a thing that had been abstract becoming undeniably, irreversibly actual. She was going to have a son. She was going to have a son, and his father was standing on a sidewalk outside this building, and nothing about her careful, constructed life was going to survive this day intact. She pressed her lips together. She watched the monitor. His heartbeat continued, indifferent to everything. When she came out of the clinic 20 minutes later, Min-jae was still there. He looked at her face, then at the small printout she was holding, the ultrasound image, black and white and grainy, that she always carried out with her and usually folded into her notebook without looking at it again until she was home. She looked at the image for a moment. Then she held it out to him. She wasn't sure why. Later, she would try to understand why. The best she could come up with was that she was tired of being the only person in the world who had ever seen his face. Min-jae took the image carefully, both hands, like it was made of something that could shatter. He looked at it for a long time. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. He didn't try to hide it and didn't seem aware of it, which was the thing that finally broke through the wall she'd been holding all morning. His name, Min-jae said, his voice barely there. Have you chosen? I'm considering Elijah. Something moved through his face. That's a good name. I know. They stood there. Two people on a sidewalk with 7 months of silence between them, and a small, grainy image of the person who was going to make all of that silence irrelevant. I'm not who I was, Min-jae said quietly. I'm not asking you to believe that. I'm not asking you for anything today. But I need you to know. Don't, she said. Not today. I can't. She stopped, started again. Not today. He nodded. He handed the image back to her and she folded it carefully, and neither of them moved for a moment. Are you safe here? He asked. I was. Are you safe? She looked at him. Are you still the same kind of danger you were? He didn't answer immediately. That pause told her something. Not what she expected it to tell her, but something. I'm working on it, he said. It was the most honest thing she'd ever heard him say. She pulled her coat tighter and looked at the street. I need to go home. I'll have a car. I'll take the bus. He pressed his mouth together. Let it go. Then I'll walk you to the stop. She thought about refusing that too. She didn't. They walked in silence, 3 feet apart, down the November street. The two men in dark coats followed at a distance that was slightly too far to be casual and slightly too close to be nothing. She was aware of them the way she'd learned to be aware of everything in Min-jae's orbit, as part of a landscape that operated by its own rules. At the bus stop, she stopped, faced him. I'm not Maya Chen to you, she said. You know that. But I need you to understand that the life I've built here, it's mine. It's real to me. Whatever comes next, it cannot swallow that. My son cannot grow up in a world where everything is about power and who holds it. Min-jae looked at her. No, he said. He can't. She searched his face. I agree with you, he said, simply. without strategy or performance or the careful construction she'd always seen in his negotiations. I agree with everything you just said. The bus appeared at the end of the street. She turned back to him one last time. I'll be in touch, she said. She boarded the bus. She did not look back, but she heard him, or thought she did, over the exhaust and the hydraulic hiss of the doors closing, say something, 2 words, quiet enough that she could pretend she hadn't heard them. She heard them. She held onto the overhead rail and watched Soul move past the window, and held those 2 words in her chest along with everything else she didn't know how to put down. Her son shifted, pressed against her ribs. She pressed back. She took the bus home. 40 minutes. The same route she had taken every week for 6 months, the same cracked seat near the back, the same view of Soul sliding past in its ordinary afternoon light. Except nothing about the 40 minutes felt ordinary anymore, and she knew by the time she got off at her stop that the version of her life she had been maintaining, carefully, exhaustingly, with the precision of someone diffusing something, was already over. She just didn't know yet what would replace it. The apartment was cold when she got in. She hadn't left the heating on. She stood in the middle of the small living room for a moment without taking her coat off, one hand on her stomach, looking at the room like she was seeing it for the first time. The folded blanket on the small couch, the second-hand crib she'd assembled herself over 3 evenings, using a YouTube tutorial and language she hoped her son couldn't hear yet. The stack of translation work on the table, the notebook on the counter. She had built this. It was small, and it was real, and it was hers. She sat down on the couch and put her face in her hands and didn't cry. She wanted to. The crying didn't come. What came instead was the specific exhaustion of someone who has been running for a very long time and has just looked over their shoulder and found the thing they were running from, standing there, calm and present, and apparently not going anywhere. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She stared at it, picked up. I need you to know that I'm not having you watched. Min-jae's voice. No preamble. The number I'm using now, it's not connected to anything. I bought it this morning. Why are you calling me? Because you walked onto that bus and I spent 20 minutes standing at the stop convincing myself not to follow it. She pressed her lips together. What stopped you? A beat. You asked me not to. She looked at the crib across the room. The little mobile she'd hung above it, paper birds in different colors that she'd made herself one sleepless night because she'd needed something to do with her hands. I'm not ready to talk, she said. I know. Then why are you calling? Because I needed to hear that you got home safely. His voice was flat. Not manipulative flat, the way she'd heard him use flatness as a tool in negotiations. This was something else. The flatness of a person who had run out of the energy required to manage how they sounded. That's all. I'll hang up. Wait. She hadn't planned to say it. It came out before the decision caught up with the impulse. Silence on the line. The files I found, she said. The operational records, the ledger with the names. She paused. I didn't take them with me when I left. I left them exactly where I found them on your private server. I want you to know that. I didn't go to anyone with them. Another silence. When he spoke again, something had shifted in his voice. I know you didn't. How do you know? Because if you had, I'd have been aware of it within 48 hours. And because, he stopped, because I know you. You knew a version of me. Maybe. He didn't argue it. That surprised her. The old Min-jae would have argued it. Get some rest. Your blood pressure was elevated. She went still. How do you know that? The nurse mentioned it when I went back in to get the notebook you left. She blinked, looked at the counter. Her notebook was sitting there. She reached across and touched the cover, confirmed it was real. You talked to the clinic staff, she said, briefly. Min-jae. The notebook has your name in it, your real name, Amara, inside the front cover. His voice was careful now. If anyone else had found it, I know. She pressed her palm flat on the cover. She'd written her name there months ago, in a moment of private defiance, because she had been tired of being Maya Chen, even in her own belongings. I know, thank you. Sleep, he said, and hung up. She sat with the dead phone in her hand for a long time. Then she put it down, got up, and made herself eat something. Rice again, an egg again. She stood at the counter and ate mechanically and looked at the paper birds turning in the small draft from the window. She still hadn't gotten around to sealing properly, and she thought, this is not going to stay simple. It had never been simple. She had just been the only complicated thing in it until today. He called again the next morning at 7:45. She was awake. She'd been awake since 5, which was now a physical fact of her third trimester rather than an emotional one. The baby had an opinion about sleep schedules, and the opinion was clear. I want to meet, Min-jae said. Good morning to you too. Good morning. A pause that she thought might contain something close to embarrassment. I want to meet, somewhere you choose, somewhere you feel safe. I have things to tell you that I can't say on the phone. She looked at the ceiling, the crack in the plaster above the bed that she'd been meaning to photograph and send to her landlord for 4 months. She had not sent it. She had also not reported the window. She had been too busy surviving to deal with minor property damage. There's a cafe 2 blocks from here, she said. It's small. The owner knows my face. It opens at 9. I'll be there. You come alone. Just you. A pause. Amara. Alone or not at all? He came alone. She was already there when he arrived, in the corner table she always took, back to the wall, facing the door. She had a cup of warm barley tea in front of her and her hands around it, and she watched him come through the door and take in the space and spot her and cross to the table without hesitation. He sat down. His coat was the same dark one from yesterday. He looked like he hadn't slept. There was a quality to his stillness that she recognized from the early days of knowing him, before she understood what it meant. The stillness of a person whose thoughts were moving very fast behind a face that had been trained not to show it. The owner, Mrs. Yoon, came over with a menu. Min-jae looked at it briefly and ordered coffee. Amara noted that his hands, when he set the menu down, were steady. They were always steady. She had never once seen his hands shake. She had wondered, in the months she'd spent rebuilding herself around his absence, whether that steadiness meant he felt less than she did. Whether the things that made her shake left him untouched. Whether she had simply been more vulnerable than him, from the beginning, and hadn't known it. She knew now that wasn't right. She'd seen his face at the clinic. The steadiness and the feeling were not the same thing. Talk, she said. He looked at her. He'd been looking at her since he sat down with the focused attention that had once made her feel like the most seen person in any room and later had made her feel like a strategic resource being assessed. The empire is being dismantled, he said. She didn't react. She'd expected him to say something. She hadn't expected that. Since when? She said. I started the process 4 months after you left. Some of it began before that. I'd been considering it, but after... He paused. His jaw shifted. After you were gone, I finished deciding. She studied him. He was not leaning forward, not using his hands, not deploying any of the body language she'd watched him use to manage conversations in rooms and people. He was just sitting, tired, telling her something true. The legitimate businesses are clean, he said. The construction arm, the import holdings, the hospitality group. Those were always clean. I've been consolidating everything into those and selling or dissolving the rest. The criminal operations, the protection arrangements, the financial channels, the enforcement structure, I've been cutting those off one by one. How long does it take? Longer than I expected. Faster than people inside it think I should be moving. His voice stayed level. There are people who built their entire lives around the organization, who are furious about what I'm doing, one of them in particular. She wrapped both hands around her tea again. Who? Han Jun-seok. He said it without inflection. My former right hand. He ran enforcement for 8 years. He was effective and loyal in the way that some men are loyal, meaning the loyalty was entirely conditional on his own interests being served. And what are his interests? Continuation. Min-jae looked at the table for a moment. Jun-seok doesn't know how to exist outside the structure. He built everything he is inside it. If I dissolve the organization, he loses his power base, his income, and his identity simultaneously. Those are not things he's willing to lose quietly. Amara thought about this, turned it over. So he's going to come after you. He already has been, indirectly, cutting access to certain financial channels, spreading information with some of the remaining partners, trying to slow the process down by creating complications I have to manage. Min-jae looked up. And then 3 days ago, I received information that he's been looking for you. The room didn't change. Mrs. Yoon was wiping down the counter. The street outside the window was doing ordinary street things. Amara's tea was still warm in her hands. "He knows about me," she said. "He knew about you when we were together. He didn't have a high opinion of the relationship." Something moved through Min Jae's expression. Not quite anger, the memory of anger maybe, worn smooth. "He's not looking for you out of concern. He's looking for you because he understands that you are the most effective way to affect my decisions." She set the tea down. "He wants to use me," she said. "As leverage." "Yes." "Against you." "Yes." She looked at him directly. "And what exactly do you want me to do with this information, Min Jae? Because if you're about to tell me that I need to come back under your protection, I'm not telling you what to do." His voice was sharp for the first time, then quieter. "I'm telling you what's happening. What you do with it is your decision. It has to be. He stopped, pressed his thumb against the edge of the table. "I've made too many decisions for you already. Even when you didn't know I was making them. I'm not doing that again." She stared at him. "You're serious," she said. "Yes. The last time I saw you say, the real you, the one running that organization, you made unilateral decisions about everything. What information I had access to, who I spoke to, where we went. I thought it was protection. I found out it was control." He didn't look away. "Yes. And you're sitting here telling me you've changed. I'm sitting here telling you that I understand why you ran, and that I'm not asking you to undo it. I'm asking you to be careful, because there's a man with resources and motivation and no moral constraints who is now aware that you exist somewhere in this city, and I am trying to prevent him from finding you the way I found you." She looked at him. The honest tiredness in his face, the way he was holding himself like a man who was genuinely trying not to take up more space than he was allowed. "You don't get forgiveness just because you're in danger," she said. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. And you don't get my trust back just because you say you've changed. I know that. Then what exactly do you want from this conversation?" He was quiet for a moment. Mrs. Yoon appeared with his coffee, set it down, disappeared again with the efficiency of a woman who understood which conversations required her absence. "I want to know that you're safe," he said. "And I want to know that when you're ready to hear the rest of it, the details, what I've been doing, what it actually looks like to walk away from something like this. I want to know you'll let me tell you." She was quiet. "And I want to know his name," Min Jae said. She looked at him. "Our son," he said, barely above a whisper. "You said you were considering Elijah. I want to know if that's what you've decided." The cafe was very quiet. Somewhere behind the counter, something was dripping. Through the window, a woman walked past with a stroller, head down against the November wind. "I've decided," Amara said. "Elijah." Min Jae closed his eyes for exactly 3 seconds. She counted. She was always counting. When he opened them, something had settled in his face. Not peace exactly. The absence of the tension that had been there since the clinic. "Elijah," he said. "Kong Elijah," she said. I decided before yesterday that he should carry your name. I thought that even if you never knew about him, it was his to have, his heritage." Min Jae put his hands flat on the table. He looked at them. He said nothing for a long moment. "Thank you," he said finally. "Don't thank me. It wasn't generosity. It was his right." "I know. Thank you anyway." She didn't tell Soo-jin. She didn't tell her mother the whole truth, just that a complication had arisen, that she was handling it, that she was fine, which was approximately 40% accurate. She spent the next 3 days in a state of careful, suspended motion, going to work, eating, sleeping in fragments, and trying to decide what she actually felt about any of it. What she felt was complicated in ways that didn't reduce to simple categories. She was angry. That was clear and solid, and she trusted it. She was angry at Min Jae for his empire, his control, the years she'd spent inside his world, not understanding the full shape of it until it was too late. She was angry at herself for the months she'd been happy there, genuinely happy, and for the way that happiness now felt like evidence of something she preferred not to examine too closely. She was also scared, which she liked less because it was harder to manage. Han Jun-seok, a name she hadn't known yesterday, a problem she hadn't had yesterday. She researched him the way she researched everything she needed to understand, systematically, quietly, using her translation firm's legal database access to pull public records, cross-referencing news items. building a picture from pieces. It took 2 evenings. What she found was incomplete but sufficient. Han Jun-seok was 44. He appeared in public records as the director of a logistics company with substantial government contracts. His photograph in a business journal from 2 years ago showed a compact man with a wide jaw and the particular expression of someone who was very comfortable taking up space. The logistics company had won several contracts through processes that had been the subject of inquiry and never the subject of consequence, which told her something about the quality of his connections. She read the inquiry documents. Then she sat back from her laptop and pressed her hands against her stomach and said quietly, "Your father really did build himself some thorough enemies." Her son pushed against her hand. "Yeah," she said, "I know." On the 4th day, Min-jae called. "Jun-seok has a contact inside the Mapo District Civil Registry," he said. No greeting. She'd stopped expecting them. "He's been running female registrations against the description he has of you. The name Maya Chen won't hold much longer." She had been expecting this, and had not been expecting how it would feel. Like the floor dropping half an inch. "How long?" she said. "Days, maybe less." She looked around the apartment, the crib, the paper birds, the translation work on the table, the life she had built inside its small walls. "What are you suggesting?" she said. "I have a residence, secure. Staff who are vetted, private, and entirely disconnected from anything connected to the former organization. I'm suggesting you consider it. I'm not moving into your house. It's not my house. It's a property I own that I've been staying at while the process of dismantling the rest of my holdings completes. It has a medical suite and a secure perimeter. You would have your own floor, full autonomy. No one enters your space without your permission, including me. Including you. Including me." She heard him breathing on the line, steady, waiting. "If I do this," she said slowly, "it's not because I trust you. It's because Han Jun-seok is a threat to my son, and I'm in my 3rd trimester, and I am not capable of running again. I know. And it changes nothing about what I said to you outside the clinic. I know. I need 2 days to arrange things. You have one." She started to argue. Stopped when she heard something in his voice that wasn't control or strategy. It was urgency, real urgency, the kind that comes from information rather than manipulation. "What happened?" she said. A pause that was slightly too long. "Jun-seok sent someone to the cafe, Mrs. Yoon's cafe, this morning. A man who asked questions about regular customers." His voice was very even. "Mrs. Yoon didn't tell him anything. She's not the type. But he was there, Amara. He was 2 blocks from your apartment. She was standing at the kitchen counter. She didn't remember standing up. He knows the neighborhood," she said. "He knows the neighborhood." She looked at the crib, at the paper birds, at the life that was already over regardless of what she decided next, because the safety it had been built on had just dissolved. "Tonight," she said. "I'll be ready tonight." She heard him exhale. "I'll send someone at 8, he said. "A woman named Ji Yeon. You can verify her identity through, just tell me what she looks like." He told her. She memorized it. She ended the call and stood in the kitchen for a moment with her hand on her stomach and her eyes on the paper birds turning slowly above the crib she hadn't finished paying for. She had 67,000 won in her wallet, $11,000 in an account she'd opened under Maya Chen's name, and a go bag she had packed on the 3rd day after arriving here because old habits from months of being afraid don't disappear just because you've stopped running. She unpacked the go bag, checked it, repacked it more efficiently. Then she sat down and wrote a note to her landlord. Thanked him for the apartment, told him she was leaving, left 3 months' rent in an envelope because she was not the kind of person who didn't pay what she owed, even when everything was falling apart. She wrote a text to Soo Jin. "I have to take a leave. Family matter. I'm sorry for the short notice. I'll be in touch when I can." She wrote nothing to her mother. She would call her from wherever she landed. Her mother would be upset and would eventually be fine and would ask 100 questions, and Amara would answer the ones she could and evade the rest, which was the particular choreography of her relationship with her mother, who loved her very much and understood her imperfectly, which was most loving relationships Amara had ever observed. At 7:58, a knock at the door. She opened it. A woman stood in the hallway. 30s, short-cropped hair, a gray coat, steady eyes. She looked at Amara the way people in Minji's orbit tended to look at things, assessing without being obvious about it. Ji-yeon, Amara said. Yes. The woman's Korean was flat and professional. Do you have bags? One. I'll take it. I've got it. Ji-yeon looked at her for a moment, made a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh. All right. Amara took one more look at the apartment, the crib. She had no way to take the crib. She thought about the paper birds. She went back in, unhooked the mobile from the crib rail, folded it carefully, and tucked it into the side pocket of her bag. Then she walked out and closed the door behind her and didn't look back this time and meant it this time. The car waiting outside was dark and unremarkable. Ji-yeon opened the rear door. Amara got in. Min-jae was not inside, which was either consideration or strategy, and she was too tired to determine which. The car moved through the November streets. Seoul at 8 in the evening was lit and loud and relentlessly itself, indifferent to the fact that a woman in its back seat was watching it pass and trying to calculate the distance between what she had chosen and what she had lost. Her phone buzzed. A text from the unlabeled number. 3 words. She read them. She looked out the window. She did not reply. But she didn't delete it either, which meant something she wasn't ready to name yet, but that was sitting in her chest alongside the exhaustion and the anger and the 7-month wait of a son who was going to need both of his parents to figure this out before he arrived and was already running out of time to do it because Jun Seok had been 2 blocks from her apartment this morning, and the address she was being taken to now was the only safe place left, and she had walked into it voluntarily. And that fact alone, that she had chosen this, was the thing she couldn't stop turning over. She pressed her hand to her stomach. Elijah pushed back. The car turned off the main road, and the city lights fell behind, and somewhere in the building they were approaching, Min-jae was waiting, and the distance between them had just collapsed from 6 months to the length of a corridor. There was no version of what came next that looked like the life she'd been building. There was only what came next. The building was not what she expected. She had constructed an image in her head during the car ride. Something angular and cold, the architectural equivalent of Min-jae's public persona, all glass and controlled sight lines and the particular sterility of spaces designed to communicate power. What Ji-yeon's car pulled into instead was a compound set back from a residential street in Seongbuk, behind a wall that was high enough to be functional and old enough to look like it had always been there. The main structure was a renovated hanok, traditional low roof lines, interior courtyards, the kind of building that had been someone's family home for generations before money and renovation had made it into something else. It looked, Amara thought, like somewhere a person actually lived. She wasn't sure if that made it better or worse. Ji-yeon led her through a side entrance, past 2 men who nodded and said nothing, down a corridor that smelled like heated wood and something faintly floral she couldn't identify. The floors were warm under her feet. Someone had turned the heating on for her arrival, or it was always like this. She couldn't tell which, and the not knowing was its own kind of information. Your floor is here, Ji-yeon said, stopping at a staircase. 2nd level, east wing, kitchen, bedroom, bathroom, a sitting room. The medical suite is on the 1st floor, accessible through the main corridor at any hour. There is a code for your door. You set it yourself on arrival, and no one else has access. Amara looked at her. Does he know the procedure for setting it? Mr. Kong selected the security system specifically because it cannot be overridden from outside the unit. Ji-yeon held her gaze. I can't speak to his motivations. I can tell you the technical fact. That's enough. She set the code herself. 6 digits. Her son's due date, reversed. She stood in the doorway of the small sitting room and looked at the space. A low table, floor cushions, a window overlooking an interior courtyard where a bare tree stood in the November dark and breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth until her heart rate felt like her own again. A knock. She opened the door. Min-jae stood in the corridor. He was in a gray sweater now, no coat, which made him look disassembled in a way she wasn't prepared for. She was so accustomed to seeing him armored, the suits, the composed exterior, that this version of him, slightly rumpled, visibly exhausted, registered as almost a different person. You made it, he said. You're surprised. No, relieved. He looked past her into the room briefly, then back to her face. Did Ji-yeon show you everything? She did. Are you hungry? The kitchen here is stocked, but if you want something specific, Min-jae. She stopped him. I'm tired. I'm 7 months pregnant, I packed my life into one bag in 40 minutes, and I have been managing my own adrenaline for approximately 6 hours. I don't need food logistics right now. He absorbed this, nodded once. Okay, I need to sleep. Whatever this is, we can start it tomorrow. Whatever this is, he repeated. Yes. He looked at her. That reading her face thing he did that she had never been able to fully make herself immune to. All right, there's a call button in the room, by the bed. If anything, I know how to use a call button. Amara. What? I'm glad you're here, said simply. No construction around it, the way a person says a true thing when they're too tired to dress it up. She said nothing, closed the door. She stood on the other side of it for a moment with her back against the wood. Then she went to the bed, which was low and wide and covered in a plain white duvet, and she lay down on her side with her knees drawn up as far as her stomach allowed and her hand pressed flat against her ribs, where Elijah was currently doing something that felt like he was rearranging furniture, and she stared at the wall until sleep arrived. It arrived faster than she expected. She didn't dream. Well, in the morning she found a breakfast tray outside her door. Rice porridge, soft-boiled egg, a small dish of pickled vegetables, a glass of water with a slice of lemon. Hot barley tea in a thermos. No note. She ate standing in the sitting room, looking out at the courtyard. The bare tree looked different in daylight, larger than she'd registered the night before, its branches making a complicated pattern against a gray sky. A bird was sitting in it, completely still, watching something she couldn't see. She thought about Han Jun-seok, about the man who had gone to Mrs. Yoon's cafe and asked questions, about the fact that someone had been 2 blocks from her apartment, breathing the same November air she breathed, looking for her. She thought about the files she'd found on Min-jae's server. She had not told Min-jae everything about those files. She had found the ledgers, yes, the operational records, the names. But she had also found something else, something she had looked at once and then buried because it was too large to process, while she was also processing the pregnancy and the running and the reconstruction of herself from scratch. A set of internal communications between Min-jae and a man whose name she hadn't recognized at the time, discussing a specific operation conducted 4 years before she'd ever met Min-jae. An operation that had resulted in the collapse of a smaller criminal organization and the imprisonment of its leadership. The communications had the clinical language of strategy, but buried in them, in a message chain she'd almost missed, was a reference to a government contact, a prosecutor's office, a cooperative arrangement. Min-jae had been feeding information to a prosecutor. Not recently, 4 years ago. Before her. Before he claims to have started dismantling his own empire. She had not known what to do with that information, and so she had done nothing with it, which was the thing she was least proud of from the last 6 months. She had filed it somewhere in the back of her mind under things that complicate the narrative and had been too exhausted to retrieve it. She needed to retrieve it now. She found him in a room on the first floor that had been set up as a working space. 2 monitors, a table covered in documents, a phone that was not the same one he'd called her from, which told her this was the operational side of whatever dismantling process he was managing. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway. He had a cup of coffee. It looked like his third. "There's something I didn't tell you," she said. He set the cup down. She told him about the prosecutor's office, the communications, the cooperative arrangement. She watched his face as she spoke, not for guilt, but for the specific expression of a person being confronted with something they knew was coming and had been waiting for. She found it. "Sit down," he said. "I'd rather stand." "Amara, sit down, please." She sat, across the table from him, so the table was between them, which was a physical fact and also clearly something else. He looked at the table for a moment, then at her. "What you found, the communications with the prosecutor's office, that's not what you think it is. Tell me what it is." 4 years ago, I made a decision. There was an organization operating in the same territory as mine, smaller but violent in ways that were creating problems. Not just for me, for the neighborhood, for businesses, for people who had nothing to do with any of it. They were running operations that involved— He stopped. Started again. There were children involved. In the trafficking infrastructure. I'm not going to soften that. His voice was flat and precise. I had a choice between handling it myself or giving the information to someone who had the legal standing to handle it properly. I chose the second option. She stared at him. You gave information to a prosecutor, she said. Yes. To take down a rival. To take down a specific operation that was harming people. The fact that it was also a rival is… He paused. It's complicated. I'm not telling you it wasn't strategic. I'm telling you the strategic and the moral were aligned in that instance, which they weren't always, and I made the choice I made. And the prosecutor? Park Sung-il. He's been retired for 2 years. The arrangement was a one-time engagement. There was no ongoing relationship, no continuing cooperation, no exchange of personal benefit. He looked at her steadily. I know that's what it looks like. I know what you thought when you found it. What did I think? That I had a prosecutor in my pocket. That it was another layer of protection for the empire. That the man you were sleeping with had reached even further into legitimate institutions than you'd realized. He said it without flinching. That's not what it was. But I can't make you believe that. She sat with this for a long moment. The bird that had been in the courtyard tree was gone. The sky outside the window was the same flat gray. Why didn't you tell me any of this when we were together? She said. Because I didn't want you to know the shape of my world. I thought I was protecting you. You were protecting the version of yourself you wanted me to see. He was quiet. Yes, he said. That's the honest answer. I know. It's the true one. She looked at her hands, her knuckles, the small scar on her right index finger from a cooking accident 3 years ago. Things that were just themselves, solid and uncomplicated. There's something else, Min-jae said. His voice had changed. She looked up. He was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not the calibrated stillness, not the exhaustion. Something underneath both of those. Something wary. Jun Seok, he said. I told you he's been trying to slow the process, spreading information, creating complications. He picked up the coffee cup, didn't drink from it, set it down again. Last night, after you arrived, I received a message from one of my remaining contacts inside his network. Information that I've been trying to verify since 3 this morning. She waited. Jun Seok doesn't just know you're in this city, Min-jae said. He knows about the pregnancy. He's known for approximately 3 weeks. The room was very quiet. How? She said. The clinic. There was a staff rotation 6 weeks ago. One of the new administrative staff at the clinic where you were registered as Maya Chen. Jun Seok's network placed someone there, deliberately. They were already looking at women's clinics in Mapo before I found you. He paused. Which means my finding you and Jun Seok finding out about the pregnancy happened almost simultaneously. The two things are not connected. I want to be clear about that. My method and his method were different, but the timing makes it look coordinated, she said. Yes. She absorbed this. So he's known for 3 weeks that you have a child coming, and he's been sitting on that information. He's been deciding how to use it. And now? Min-jae's jaw tightened. It was the first involuntary physical response she'd seen from him today. The message I received last night. Jun Seok has contacted 2 of the 3 remaining partners in the organization who haven't yet agreed to the dissolution terms. He's offering them a counter-proposal. What kind of counter-proposal? He's proposing to take over the remaining operations himself. Frame my withdrawal as instability. Position himself as the reliable continuation of the organization. Min-jae finally drank from the coffee cup. Put it down with a controlled precision that told her his hands wanted to do something else. To do that convincingly, he needs to demonstrate that I'm compromised, that I can be controlled. He intends to use you, specifically the pregnancy, as public proof that I've been weakened by a personal entanglement, that I'm making decisions based on emotion rather than organizational interest. She felt cold. He's going to go public with it. He's going to use it in a very specific context. There's a meeting scheduled in 4 days. The remaining partners, Jun Seok, and 2 independent brokers who have interests in what happens to the organization's assets. Jun Seok intends to arrive at that meeting with documentation of your existence, your pregnancy, and my behavior over the last 6 months, including the fact that I found you and immediately provided you with protected housing, as evidence that I've lost the capacity to lead. Amara stood up. She couldn't sit still through this. She went to the window and stood with her arms folded under her chest, looking at the empty courtyard. He's not wrong, she said. What? The argument. That you've been compromised by personal feeling. He's not wrong, is he? She turned around. You started seriously dismantling the organization after I left. You spent 6 months looking for me. The moment you found me, you shifted resources and created a secure situation to protect me. From the perspective of someone who doesn't care about any of the reasons, he's not wrong about the sequence of events. Minjae looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully decode. No, he said. He's not wrong about the sequence. So he goes to that meeting. He presents his case. The remaining partners, what do? 2 of them may go with him. If they do, the dissolution process stops. The remaining assets, which are still substantial, come back under active criminal management. The legitimate businesses I've been trying to separate from the rest become contested. And Jun Seok, once he's established control, will have every incentive to ensure that I cannot challenge him. He paused. Which means I become a liability, and so does everyone connected to me. She looked at him. He'll come after you, she said. He'll come after both of us. And the baby? The words sat in the room between them. Minjae stood up. She watched him move to the window, not next to her. He left space, always leaving space now, as if he was aware that proximity required permission, and look out at the same bare tree. I won't let that happen, he said. How? I'm working on Minjae. How? Her voice was sharp. She needed the concrete. The plan. The thing that was going to prevent a man with no moral constraints and a 4-day window from walking into a room and burning down what was left of the protection around them. Not in principle. Specifically, what are you doing? He turned to face her. His hands were in his pockets. His jaw was set. Park Sung-il, the retired prosecutor. I've been in contact with him. There is a current investigation. A different prosecutor's office, newer, someone who wasn't party to the arrangement 4 years ago, into the financial channels that Jun Seok controls. I've been providing documentation to support that investigation for the past 3 months. He said it clearly and without apology. If the investigation moves fast enough, Jun Seok doesn't make it to the meeting. And if it doesn't move fast enough, he said nothing. Minjae. Then I go to the meeting myself, he said. She stared at him. You're not serious. I have controlling interest in the remaining assets. I have legal standing to dissolve the organization's financial infrastructure regardless of what Jun Seok presents to those partners. If I'm physically present, he could have you killed. He could try. That's not reassurance. I know. Something crossed his face. I know it's not. She pressed her hands flat against her stomach. Elijah was still, which was unusual for this hour. He was normally in motion by mid-morning. She focused on the stillness for a moment, the small, specific weight of him, real and present. I want to see the documentation, she said. He blinked. What? The investigation materials. What you've been providing to the prosecutor's office. I want to see it. She met his eyes. I am a legal translator. I have spent the last 6 months working in a firm that handles criminal law documents. I can read these materials faster and more accurately than most people you're paying to handle them. And I need to know what we're actually working with. He studied her. That information, if it were compromised. I am living in your safe house carrying your child while a man with no moral constraints has had a 3-week head start on planning how to use me as leverage, she said. The information is already compromised. I am already inside this. Let me be useful inside it instead of just a liability you're managing. A long silence. I'll get you the files, he said. She spent 6 hours with the documentation. Ji Yeon brought her lunch. She ate without tasting it, her eyes on the pages, her brain running in the precise translation and analysis mode that she was good at and had spent the last 6 months using on other people's problems and had never expected to need for her own. The investigation was real. The documentation was substantial. The prosecutorial office, a financial crimes unit that had been quietly building a case for 14 months, had evidence connecting Jun Seok's logistics company to a series of fraudulent government contracts and a money laundering channel that moved funds through 3 different countries. What they didn't have, or hadn't had, was the internal organizational documentation to demonstrate the criminal origin of the funds being laundered. That was what Minjae had been providing. She went through it page by page. She flagged 3 documents that she recognized from the file structure as originating in the same server she'd accessed before she left. The server that contained the ledgers, the operational records, the names. She flagged them. Then she sat back. The server she'd accessed. The one she'd left exactly as she'd found it. The one Min-jae had confirmed she hadn't been traced through. She had not been traced through it, but she had accessed it. And if the investigation had pulled the server logs, if they had the access records alongside the documents Min-jae had been providing, she went to the door and called down the corridor for Ji-yeon. "I need to speak to Min-jae now." He came within 4 minutes. She showed him the flagged documents, explained the server access, watched his face change. "You accessed the server from here?" he said. "From a rental apartment in Mapo, using a VPN purchased under a different name. But the server logs would show the access. If the prosecution has the server logs as part of the documentation you provided." He picked up one of the flagged pages and looked at it. She watched him calculate. He was fast with this kind of information. She'd always known that, the speed of his thinking when it was moving in a direction it recognized. "The access log would show an external IP from the Mapo district," he said, time-stamped. "If the prosecution team matches that against the evidence record, they find an unidentified access event from the same district where Han Jun-seok's network placed someone in a women's clinic," she said. He looked at her. "He'll tell them it was a mole," she said. "Jun-seok will. He'll find the access log, recognize the timestamp, and use it to argue that someone inside your network was leaking information to a competing party. He'll point at the Mapo connection. He'll build an argument that your own intelligence was being sold while you were preparing the dissolution." She paused. "He doesn't have to prove it. He just has to introduce it as doubt at that meeting, and then your documentation loses its credibility." Min-jae put the page down very carefully. "When did you access the server?" he said. His voice had gone to that flat, stripped register. "The night before I left. I had a 30-minute window while you were in a meeting that ran late." She looked at him steadily. "I wasn't looking for what I found. I was looking for something else, and I found the ledgers instead." "What were you looking for?" She hesitated. "The truth," she said. "I'd been feeling for weeks that something was wrong, that the edges of your life didn't match the center of it. I was looking for the thing that would tell me I was being paranoid." A pause. "I found the opposite." He was very still. "You were looking for a reason to stay," he said. She didn't answer. Her silence was its own answer, again. Min-jae pressed both hands flat on the table. He looked at the documents. He looked at the flagged pages. He looked at the window. "The meeting is in 4 days," he said. "I know. If Jun-seok gets to those partners before the investigation moves, I know. I need the prosecution to accelerate the timeline." He straightened. Something was shifting in him. She could see it, the particular quality of a decision being made. Not the cold strategic calculation she'd spent a year watching. Something more desperate than that. Something that looked like a man who had just understood that the careful, methodical path he'd been walking had a time limit he had not accounted for. "I need to give them something that moves this faster, something that removes any ambiguity about the documentary evidence." He looked at her. "And I need to fix the server access problem before Jun-seok finds it." "How do you fix it?" "I give the prosecution the log myself, proactively, with context explaining the external access, before he finds it and gets to frame it first." She stared at him. "You're going to walk into a prosecutor's office and hand them evidence of an unidentified server access from a woman who was living under a false name. I'm going to walk in with my attorney and my documentation and a comprehensive account of the dissolution process and present the server logs as part of a full disclosure that preempts anything Jun-seok could present." He looked at her. His eyes were clear. "It's the only move that neutralizes him before the meeting. And if they ask who accessed the server?" A silence. "Then I tell them it was a private individual who has since come forward and whose identity I'm prepared to disclose through proper legal channels," he said. "And I call the best attorney I know." She understood what he was telling her. "You're asking me to be on record," she said. "I'm telling you what the situation is. What you decide to do with that is yours. If I go on record, even through an attorney, even through proper channels, Maya Chen disappears completely, and Amara Bennett becomes part of a criminal investigation." "Yes." "While pregnant?" "Yes." "That's what you're telling me?" "Yes." He looked at her. His hands on the table were finally not steady. She could see it, a very slight pressure, the knuckles pale. I know what I'm asking. I know I have no right to ask it. I am telling you the truth about what we're dealing with and what the options are. That is all I can give you. She looked at him, at the documents, at the flagged pages, at her own name, her real name, written inside the front cover of a notebook, which a man she was trying to survive had returned to her at a clinic 2 days ago because he knew it mattered. She thought about a meeting in 4 days. A man with no moral constraints and a head start of 3 weeks. A baby who was going to arrive in approximately 8 weeks regardless of what any of them decided. She thought about what Min-jae had said at the cafe. I've made too many decisions for you already. I'm not doing that again. He was keeping that promise. She could see it costing him. She could see exactly how much it cost him to lay all of this out and wait. She pulled one of the flagged pages toward her. She looked at it for a long moment. Get me your attorney's number, she said. He looked at her. And get me a legal pad, she said. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it right. I need to draft a precise account of the server access event, date, time, method, duration, files accessed, files not accessed, and the reason. She looked up. I'm a translator. I know exactly how much precision matters when something is going on the record. Min-jae reached for his phone. Amara, he said, don't thank me. I need to tell you something first. His voice had dropped. She made herself look at him. The letter. There's a letter. I wrote it 4 months ago when I thought the dismantling might get me killed before I found you. I left it with my attorney with instructions to find you if something happened to me. He paused. I want you to read it. Not because I want your sympathy, because I think you deserve to know what I wrote when I thought you'd never see me again. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and laid an envelope on the table between them. Her name on the front, her real name, in his handwriting. You can read it now or not at all. It doesn't change what happens next. She looked at the envelope. She looked at him. She picked it up. She did not open it yet. She held it in both hands, and she felt the weight of it, which was slight, a few pages, nothing more, and also the weight of everything it represented, which was not slight at all, and which was going to require more than she currently had available. Legal pad, she said. He handed her one. She uncapped a pen. And somewhere outside, in a city that did not know their names and did not care about their choices, Han Jun-seok was sitting across a table from 2 men who were deciding whether the organization they'd built their fortunes on was worth more intact or dissolved, and the clock that had been running for 4 days was now running for 3, and the distance between where they were and where they needed to be had just become the thing that everything else depended on. She read the letter at 2 in the morning. She had not planned to read it then. She had put it on the low table in the sitting room and worked through 4 hours of document drafting with Min-jae's attorney, a precise, economical woman named Choi Hae-won, who asked only the questions she needed answered and did not editorialize, and then eaten something she couldn't name and taken a shower and lain down and stared at the ceiling for 90 minutes. Then she got up and opened the envelope. It was 3 pages, handwritten. The handwriting was not the controlled script she'd seen on documents he signed. It was looser, slightly uneven, the handwriting of someone writing fast or in low light, or with a hand that was not entirely steady. He did not begin with her name. He began mid-sentence, as if he'd been talking to her in his head for so long that the letter was just the point where it spilled over into something physical. She read it once quickly. Then she read it again slowly. She folded it and put it back in the envelope and sat on the edge of the bed with it in her hands. She did not cry. She wanted to. She sat there with the specific feeling of someone who has just been handed information that reorganizes something fundamental, and she breathed through it, and after a while she put the envelope in the side pocket of her bag next to the paper bird mobile, and she went back to bed. She slept 4 hours. When she woke, it was the 3rd day. 1 day left before the meeting. The attorney, Choi Hae-won, arrived at 7 with 2 associates and a secure laptop. Min-jae was already in the working room when Amara came down, dressed and with her hair pulled back and the legal pad she'd filled the night before under her arm. He looked at her face when she walked in. She looked back at his. They did not discuss the letter. Neither of them had the bandwidth for what that conversation would require, and they both understood that without saying it. The prosecution's office confirmed a meeting for 10, Hae-won said. They are expecting Mr. Kong and counsel. They are not expecting a second party. That changes, Min-jae said. Haewon looked at Amara. Assessment, no judgment. You want to be present. I want to provide a direct account of the server access event, Amara said. In person, with my statement in writing and my attorney present. She looked at Haewon. Can you represent both of us simultaneously, or do I need separate counsel? Separate is cleaner. Haewon was already pulling out her phone. I'll have someone there by 9:30. Someone good? I don't work with anyone who isn't. Min-jae watched this exchange. He said nothing. She could feel him not saying things. The effort of it. The specific restraint of a man who had spent his entire adult life being the person who made decisions in rooms and was now watching someone else make them and holding himself back from the old reflex. She appreciated it. She did not say so. At 9:15, she was in the back of a car with Ji Yeon, heading south through morning Seoul traffic. The sky had lightened to a pale gray-white, the particular Seoul winter sky that held light without warmth. She watched the city through the window. Her legal pad was in her lap. The attorney Haewon had organized for her, a man named Ryu Tae-suk, who practiced criminal and civil law and had a handshake that was brief and businesslike, and eyes that were paying attention, sat beside her and read through her written statement without comment. This is precise, he said finally. I'm a translator. I can see that. He closed the pad. The prosecution will ask why you didn't come forward with this information earlier. I'll tell them the truth. I was frightened. I was 7 months pregnant, living under a false identity, and trying to protect myself and my child from a man who has since been identified as an active threat. I made the choice I made with the information I had. Ryu looked at her. That's an honest answer. I'm aware that it also makes me look like I was protecting Mr. Kang. Were you? She thought about it. I was protecting myself. It happens to serve the same interest in this instance. And now? Now the threat is real enough that staying quiet is more dangerous than speaking. She looked at him. I'm not here because I've forgiven him. I'm here because I have a son who is going to arrive in 8 weeks, and I refuse to let him be born into a situation I had the ability to affect and chose not to. Ryu nodded. He made a note. The prosecutor's office was a gray building in Seocho. They went in through a side entrance. Min-jae and Haewon were already in a conference room on the 3rd floor when Amara and Ryu arrived. The lead prosecutor, a woman in her late 40s named Shin Yeon-hee, with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and the permanent tiredness of someone who had been doing this work for 20 years, looked at Amara with an expression that was entirely neutral and entirely attentive simultaneously. You are, she said. Amara Bennett, Amara said. I have a statement regarding an access event on a private server that you've received documentation from. I believe the access log is part of your evidentiary record, and I'm here to provide context before it becomes a problem. Shin looked at Ryu. She's represented? She is. Shin looked back at Amara. Sit down, Ms. Bennett. The meeting ran 2 hours and 40 minutes. Amara gave her account. Ryu interjected 3 times. Once to rephrase a question he considered misleading, twice to clarify the scope of what his client was and wasn't disclosing. Shin and her team asked 27 questions. Amara counted. She answered all of them. Some of the answers were incomplete. There were things she knew that were hers and not the prosecution's, and Ryu was clear about those boundaries. But none of them were false. Min-jae sat across the table through most of it. She did not look at him often. When she did, his face was doing the things she'd come to understand over the course of 3 days of being in close proximity to him. The controlled surface and the thing moving underneath, visible if you knew where to look. At the end, Shin set down her pen. The documentation you've been providing, she said to Min-jae, combined with what Ms. Bennett has provided today, this accelerates our timeline considerably. Min-jae said nothing, waiting. The meeting's scheduled for tomorrow, Shin said. She had done her homework, of course she had. We're aware of it. How? Haewon said immediately. We have been aware of Han Jun-seok for 8 months. Shin's voice was flat. He is not the only subject of this investigation. The meeting tomorrow is on our radar. We had planned to allow it to proceed as a data point. She paused. Ms. Bennett's account changes our calculus. The room was very still. You're going to move on him before the meeting, Min-jae said. I'm not going to tell you what we're going to do. Shin looked at him without warmth. What I'm going to tell you is that the cooperation you have provided over 3 months at considerable personal legal risk has been noted and will be considered in the context of your dissolution process. She looked at Amara. And what Ms. Bennett has provided today is on record. She will be contacted through her attorney if further information is required. She stood up. The meeting was over. In the corridor outside, Amara stood against the wall and breathed. Ryu was speaking quietly with Haewon. Minji came to stand near her, not crowding, maintaining the space, and looked at the opposite wall. You did well, he said. Don't. I mean it technically, not as I know what you mean. She pressed her back against the wall. The baby was pushing upward, hard into her ribs. He's unhappy with the position I've been sitting in. He? Elijah. She shifted, trying to give him room. He doesn't like when I'm tense. Minjae looked at her stomach, then away. Can I? He stopped. She looked at him. Can I get you water? He said, which was not what he'd started to ask. She knew it. He knew she knew it. Yes, she said. Water. He came back with a paper cup from a dispenser in the corridor. She drank it. They stood in the hallway of a prosecutor's office in Seocho with their attorneys 10 feet away and the sound of a government building being its ordinary bureaucratic self around them, and neither of them said anything for a moment. The letter, she said. He went still. I read it. I know. I could tell this morning. She looked at the cup in her hand. You said you didn't want forgiveness. You meant that. I meant it. Then what do you want? He was quiet for long enough that she looked at him. His jaw was tight. His eyes, when they met hers, had that stripped quality she'd been seeing more and more. The thing underneath the control, unmanaged. I want to be there, he said. When he's born. I want to be in the room. I know I haven't earned that. I know you might not. He stopped, started again. I want to be in the room. She looked at him. She did not say yes. She did not say no. She handed him the empty paper cup and pushed off the wall and walked back to where Ryu was standing. The rest of the day was operational. Haewon's team worked through the legal infrastructure of Minjae's dissolution documentation, cross-referencing the materials against what the prosecution had confirmed receiving. Amara sat in the working room and translated 3 documents from legal Korean into English at Minjae's attorney's request. Financial records that needed to be submitted in English for an international banking authority. Because she was there and she was good at it, and being useful was better than sitting with her own thoughts. Minji spent most of the afternoon on calls she could hear fragments of through the closed door of the adjacent room. His voice, in those calls, was different from either the version she'd known or the version he'd been showing her. It was the operational voice, clipped, precise, moving fast. She'd heard it twice before when she was with him, always at a distance, and it had unsettled her both times because it didn't sound like someone she recognized. It still didn't. But the content of the fragments she caught was different from what she'd expected. She heard, "The accounts need to be cleaned by close of business Friday, not a day after." She heard, "If Sungil is unavailable, go through Haewon's office. Don't leave a gap." She heard once, quieter, "I don't care what it costs. Just make sure the audit trail is clean." She thought about the letter, what he had written in it. The specific wording of 3 particular sentences she had not stopped turning over since 2 in the morning. She translated the financial records. She drank barley tea. She did not think about how tired she was, which was how she had been managing the tiredness for 6 months, by simply not attending to it. At 6:15, Jiyeon came to the door. "There's a situation," Jiyeon said. Her voice was level. Everything in Minjae's orbit was always level. But Amara had spent 3 days developing a calibration for Jiyeon specifically, and what she heard underneath the level tone was not calm. She stood up. "What kind?" "Mr. Kong needs you in the main room." Minjae was standing at the table when she got there. Haewon was on the phone in the corner, her back to the room, her voice inaudible. 2 of the men from the compound perimeter were standing inside the door, which they had never done before. One of them was holding a phone displaying an image she couldn't see from across the room. She crossed to Minjae. He turned to face her. His face was doing the controlled surface thing at maximum intensity, which she had learned meant whatever was underneath was bad. "Junseok moved the meeting," he said. "To when?" Tonight, 9 o'clock. He looked at her. He found out about the prosecutor's office. She felt the cold settle into her chest again. The same cold as the clinic, as the cafe, as every moment when the careful thing collapsed. How? I don't know yet. Someone in the building, someone on the street outside, a connection inside the prosecution team. His jaw tightened. It doesn't matter how. He knows we went in. He's accelerating because he knows we're trying to get ahead of him. She looked at the clock on the wall. 3 hours. What does that mean, she said, for the prosecution's timeline? Haewon is on the phone with Shin's office now. He glanced at Haewon's turned back. The question is whether they can move fast enough, or whether Junseok walks into that meeting first. And if he does, and the two undecided partners go with him, the dissolution process becomes legally contested. It doesn't stop. I have the controlling interest, the legal standing, but it slows down to the pace of litigation, which is months, maybe longer. He looked at her. And Junseok, free and operational, and now aware that I've been cooperating with a prosecution team, becomes significantly more dangerous. The man at the door held up his phone. Min-jae crossed to him, looked at the screen. His body language changed. What? She said. He came back. He showed her the phone. It was a photograph. Taken from distance, slightly blurred, but clear enough. The exterior of the compound, the street outside. The angle suggested it was taken from a vehicle moving past. The timestamp was 40 minutes ago. He's watching this address, she said. He's been watching it since last night. We didn't catch the surveillance until an hour ago. His voice was very even. Which means he knows you're here. She looked at the photograph. At the gate of the compound, identifiable if you knew what you were looking at. At the street outside. He has the leverage, she said. He thinks he does. Does he not? Min-jae looked at her. She watched him calculate. Not strategically this time, not the cold organizational chess she'd seen him play 100 times. Something else. Something messier and more urgent. He has your location. He doesn't know what happened at the prosecutor's office today. If he knew that, he wouldn't be moving to the meeting. He'd be moving to leave the country. He paused. He doesn't know his timeline just got cut from days to hours. But his surveillance team is outside this compound. Yes. So if the prosecution moves on him tonight, then his people outside see it happen and disappear. He looked at her. You and Elijah are safe. The meeting doesn't happen. The dissolution completes. And if the prosecution doesn't move fast enough, a silence. Then I go to the meeting, he said. You said that before. I told you before. I know what you told me. His voice cut across hers. Not harsh, urgent. I know. But if Junseok sits down with those partners and starts presenting his case before I'm there to contest it, the window closes. Everything I've spent 8 months building closes with it. And when it closes, the organization doesn't dissolve. It reconstitutes under a man who does not have my... He stopped. Your what? My reasons to change, he said quietly. The room was very still. Haewon turned from the corner. Her face confirmed what Amara already felt in her chest. Shin's office cannot guarantee action before 9. They need a minimum of 2 hours to mobilize the warrants they'd need to intercept the meeting legally. The timeline is tight. How tight? Min-jae said. They may make it. They may not. Haewon's voice was precisely calibrated. Those are the options. Min-jae looked at Amara. She looked back at him. You're going to the meeting, she said. It wasn't a question. If the prosecution doesn't confirm action by 8, yes. And you want me to stay here? Yes. With Junseok's surveillance team outside. They won't move against this compound. He doesn't want a direct confrontation with me. He wants the meeting. He wants the organizational legitimacy. He's not going to do anything overt while there's any chance I'm inside and might survive to contest it legally. He looked at her. If I'm gone, if I'm at the meeting, that calculus changes, which is why Ji-yeon stays with you, and 2 additional men on the perimeter, and Haewon's associate on a direct line to Shin's office. She looked at him, at the photograph on the phone, at the clock, at Ji-yeon, standing near the door with the specific stillness of someone ready to move in any direction. If you go to that meeting, she said, and something happens to you, then the dissolution is complete through the legal mechanisms already in place. Haewon handles the rest. You and Elijah are financially... I'm not talking about the legal mechanisms. Her voice came out harder than she intended. She didn't soften it. I'm talking about you walking into a room with a man who has made it clear that your continued existence is an obstacle to his plans. I'm talking about what happens to a child who grows up without his father, because his father walked into that situation and didn't walk back out. Min-jae was very still. I've thought about that, he said. And? And I've thought about what happens to that same child if his father stays safe while the organization his father built from the ground up is handed to a man like Jun Seok. And the legacy of that, the violence of it, the reach of it, becomes something the child carries anyway, without the father having done the one thing that could have stopped it. She pressed her lips together. Her eyes were stinging, and she was furious at that because she did not have room for it right now. Go, she said. Amara, go. Do what you have to do. Her voice was steady. She was making it steady by force. But you come back. That's the condition. You come back. He looked at her for a long moment. The room around them, the attorneys, Ji-yeon, the men at the door, the whole operational machinery of it, reduced to background noise. I'll come back, he said. She nodded, turned away before she said something she wasn't prepared for. At 7:42, Shin's office had not confirmed action. At 7:58, Min-jae put on his coat. He paused at the door to the working room. Hae-won was on the phone again. Ji-yeon was standing near Amara. He looked at Amara across the room. She looked back. She didn't say anything. There was nothing left to say that would matter more than what had already been said. He left. She listened to the compound go quieter. The sound of a car leaving, Ji-yeon moving to the window. Ji-yeon says Jun Seok pulled his surveillance. He knows something. I know, I was just told. A pause. I'm 2 minutes from the location. The prosecution, Amara. His voice cut in. Not harsh. Clear. I need to focus. I know. Come back. A silence that lasted exactly long enough for her to feel the full weight of it. I'll come back, he said. The call ended. She stood at the window with the dead phone in her hand. Ji-yeon was beside her, not touching, just present. Outside, the compound was quiet. Seoul beyond the wall was its ordinary loud nighttime self. Somewhere south of here, in a building she'd never seen, the man she had run from and the man who had hunted her through her hiding places were walking toward the same room, and all she could do was stand at a window and count. The call came at 9:41. Not Min-jae. Hae-won's phone. The attorney crossed the room in 4 steps, listened, asked 2 questions, ended the call. Amara was already watching her face. Shin's team reached the meeting location at 9:19, Hae-won said. Jun Seok was taken into custody at 9:23. And Min-jae, Hae-won's expression shifted, something careful in it. He was already in the room when the prosecution team arrived, she said. He had been there for 9 minutes. 9 minutes. In a room with Jun Seok, knowing the prosecution may or may not arrive in time. 9 minutes of whatever that conversation had been, before the door opened and the legal authority arrived and the room changed entirely. Is he... She stopped, started again. Is he all right? Hae-won looked at her steadily. There was an altercation before the prosecution team arrived. She paused. He is not seriously injured. He will need medical attention for... Another pause, and Amara felt the pause like a physical thing pressing on her chest. He has a broken hand and lacerations on his face. He refused to leave the location until the documentation with the prosecution team was complete. Broken hand. Face. 9 minutes. Where is he now? Amara said. He's completing the formal cooperation statement. His attorney is present. He should be... Her phone buzzed. Unlabeled number. She picked up. Silence on the line for a moment. Then breathing. Uneven. Not his normal breathing. I'm coming back, he said. His voice was different, rougher. Something in it she hadn't heard before. How bad? She said. I'm fine. Min-jae. My hand. A short exhale. And my face looks like I lost an argument. Did you? No. A pause. He's in custody. The partners saw it happen. Neither of them is going to contest the dissolution now. His voice dropped. It's done, Amara. It's done. She pressed her free hand flat against the window glass, cold under her palm. "Come back," she said. 20 minutes. She stood at the window for all 20 of them. When the car pulled through the gate, she was in the courtyard. Ji-yeon had tried to suggest she wait inside. She had gone to the courtyard. The car door opened. Min-jae got out. He looked like something that had been through a fight and won on points rather than by any margin that felt comfortable. His face, the left side, was darkening into bruising, a cut at his cheekbone that had been roughly cleaned but not properly treated. His jaw set at the specific angle of someone managing pain with the same stubbornness they applied to everything else. His right hand was wrapped in a makeshift bandage that was someone's best attempt with what was available. He stopped when he saw her in the courtyard. She crossed to him. She stopped with a foot of space between them and looked at his face, at the cut, the bruising, the hand. "Broken where?" she said. "2 fingers, the third and fourth. You need imaging." "I know. And the cut needs closing properly." "I know." She looked at him. At his eyes, which were tired in a way that went beyond the fight, beyond the night, down into something that had been accumulating for a very long time. She reached up. She put her hand against the undamaged side of his face, carefully, just her palm against his jaw, and she felt him go absolutely still, like the battery removal, like the first time she'd told him she loved him. "You came back," she said. He closed his eyes. "I came back," he said. Her stomach tightened. She registered it before she registered what it meant. A band of pressure, low and absolute, different from the baby's movement, different from anything she'd felt in 7 months, different from anything she'd felt before. She knew what it was. She'd read enough, listened to Dr. Park carefully enough, been paying attention to her own body with the focused anxiety of a woman who was doing this alone and could not afford to miss anything. This was not Braxton Hicks. This was not positioning or pressure. She said his name. He opened his eyes. He saw her face. "What?" he said, fast, already moving. "I think—" She stopped, breathed through the tightening. It released after 20 seconds. She counted. "I think my son has his own opinion about tonight's schedule." Min-jae's hand, the undamaged one, came to her arm. "How long?" "I don't know. It just started." She looked at him. 8 weeks early." "Ji-yeon!" He was already moving, arm around her, not tight, careful, always careful with her now, his voice cutting across the courtyard. "Get the car. Get Dr. Park's emergency line, now." The courtyard exploded into motion around her. She stood in the middle of it with Min-jae's arm around her and another contraction beginning to build, and soul invisible beyond the compound walls and thought, with the specific clarity that arrives sometimes in the middle of chaos. This is the night everything becomes real. Not the clinic, not the prosecutor's office, not the letter, this. "I've got you," Min-jae said. His voice was close to her ear, rough and present and real. "I know," she said. The car came. They moved. The contractions were 4 minutes apart by the time the car reached the hospital. She knew this because Min-jae was counting them, not out loud. He was sitting beside her with his good hand flat on the seat between them, not touching her unless she reached for something, watching the clock on his phone with the focused intensity of a man who had decided that counting was the one useful thing he could do and was doing it with everything he had. She could see him tracking the intervals. She could see the number in his face each time one peaked and released. 4 minutes, then 3.5. Dr. Park met them at the emergency entrance. She had the calm of someone who had been called at 10:30 at night by a panicked security detail and had arrived before the patient did, which told Amara something about her that she filed away for later. Dr. Park looked at Amara's face, took her wrist, spoke 2 sentences to the attending nurse, and then looked at Min-jae. "You're the father?" "Yes." She looked at his face, the bruising, the cut, the wrapped hand. "You need attention too. Later. That's not a request." "Later," he said again, in the voice he used when a decision had been made and the conversation was over. Dr. Park looked at him for exactly 2 seconds. Then she turned back to Amara. "Let's go." The delivery suite was white and warm and brighter than anything outside it. Amara changed, was examined, was told that yes, this was real labor, That at 32 weeks the baby was early, but not critically so. That the hospital had a level 3 NICU and a neonatal team who were being notified and would be present. That her job right now was to breathe and let her body do what it had been building toward for 8 months. "Can he stay?" Amara said. Dr. Park glanced at Min Jae, who was standing near the door with his damaged hand held at his side, and his face doing the controlled surface thing at a level she'd never seen before. The level of someone who was holding themselves together by main force and would not stop until they were told they could. "He can stay," Dr. Park said. "Someone will clean that cut first." A nurse appeared with a kit. Min Jae sat in the chair she indicated. He did not take his eyes off Amara while the nurse cleaned the laceration on his cheekbone and closed it with steri strips. He didn't flinch. Amara watched him not flinch and thought, absurdly, about the letter. 3 particular sentences. She had them memorized now. She hadn't meant to memorize them. She'd read them twice, and they'd lodged the way certain things lodge. Not because you held on to them, but because they were shaped exactly like the space they fell into. Another contraction. She breathed through it, counted, released. "Talk to me," she said when it passed. Min Jae looked at her. "About what?" "Anything. The meeting. What happened in the 9 minutes before the prosecution arrived." The nurse finished with his face and moved to his hand. He looked down briefly, then back at Amara. "You want to hear that now?" "I want something to focus on that isn't my body." He was quiet for a moment. The nurse was gentle and efficient with his fingers. He absorbed the pain of the examination with the stillness of someone who was allocating his discomfort budget elsewhere. "Jun Seok was already there when I arrived," he said, "with one of the undecided partners, the Busan connection, Jung Ho. The other partner hadn't come yet." He paused. "Jun Seok wasn't surprised to see me. He'd known I might come. He'd prepared for it." "Prepared how?" "He had documentation. Everything he'd told me he was going to present. Your existence, the pregnancy, my behavior over the last 6 months. All of it printed and laid on the table in front of Jung Ho before I walked through the door." A short breath. "He also had something I didn't know about." She looked at him. "The server," he said. He'd found the access log. He had the timestamp, the IP trace to Mapo, and he had constructed a theory around it. That there was a breach in my network, that information had been sold, that my willingness to dissolve the organization was evidence of external pressure from someone who had compromised me. "He was pointing at me," she said, "without naming you. He didn't know who had accessed the server, only that someone had. He was using it as a general argument for instability." Min Jae's jaw tightened. "I told him I knew exactly who had accessed the server, that it wasn't a breach, that the person had already provided a statement to the prosecution's office that morning." "You told him we'd gone to the prosecutor?" "Yes." She watched his face. "How did he take that?" "Badly." The nurse wrapped his hand. He looked at the wrapping briefly. He stood up. Jung Ho started to leave. Jun Seok told him not to. Told him the prosecution disclosure was a bluff, that I was trying to force a standoff, that anyone who had genuinely cooperated with the prosecution wouldn't announce it to the people being investigated. He paused. He was right, actually. It was a move that only worked if the prosecution was genuinely already moving. If they weren't, I just told him everything. But they were moving. I didn't know that for certain when I said it. He met her eyes. "I knew you'd gone in. I knew what you'd given them. I calculated that it was enough to move them, and I made the call." She stared at him. "You were gambling." "I was calculating. On information that wasn't confirmed." "Yes." She looked at the ceiling for a moment. Another contraction building. She felt the beginning of it, the tightening. She breathed in through her nose. "And then he hit you." "He tried to leave past me. I didn't move. He made it physical." The contraction peaked. She gripped the bed rail. He was on his feet immediately, at the rail, his good hand near hers. Not grabbing, just present. She breathed through it, counted. 8 seconds. 10. Release. She exhaled. "You didn't move because you needed to keep him in the room until the prosecution arrived." "I needed Jung Ho to see him make it physical first," Min Jae said. Jun Seok spent 8 years building a reputation for control. The moment he lost it in front of a partner, the moment the prosecution walked through the door 2 minutes later, Young-ho understood exactly what kind of man he'd been about to align himself with. She looked at him. At the bruising on his face, the starry strips, the wrapped hand. "You let him do that to you," she said, deliberately. "I didn't let him. I made a choice about what I was willing to absorb in order to get the outcome I needed." He looked at her steadily. "There's a difference." She held his gaze. Outside the room, the hospital made its ordinary nighttime sounds. Inside, the monitors beeped steadily. Elijah's heartbeat, coming through the sensor, filling the room with its percussion. "I know," she said finally. "I know there's a difference." She watched something ease in his face. Small, but real. Elijah Kong Bennett arrived at 4:17 in the morning. He was small. All early babies were small, Dr. Park had told her. And this did not prepare you for the actual smallness, the specific reality of a person who fit in 2 hands and weighed as much as a large book and was nevertheless entirely, emphatically, loudly himself. He cried immediately. This was the first thing, the cry of a baby born with opinions and the lung capacity to express them, which the neonatal team received as the best possible information. Amara heard the cry, and something in her chest that had been clenched for 8 months released all at once. Not gradually. All at once. Like a fist opening. She was exhausted in a way that had no analogy. She had been in labor for 6 hours, the last 2 of them intense in the way that made everything before them retroactively manageable by comparison. She was wrung out completely. She could feel the absence of the energy she'd been running on. Adrenaline and stubbornness and the sheer animal determination of a body doing the work it was built for, leaving her system like water draining. She held out her arms. The nurse placed him against her chest. He was wrapped in white, his face scrunched and furious and perfect in the way of something that has been through something difficult and survived it, and is not done being angry about it yet. She looked at him. She had been preparing herself for this moment for 8 months. She had read about it, thought about it, written about it in the notebook she carried. She had expected to feel something enormous and defined. What she felt was larger than that and less articulable. Not an emotion exactly, but a reorganization, a shift in the structure of something fundamental. The world rearranging itself around a new fixed point. "Hi," she said. Her voice was wrecked. "Hi. I'm your mother. We've been through a lot already." He made a sound. Not words. The sounds of a person who had been somewhere very small and warm and was now somewhere enormous and loud and was processing all of it at high volume. She looked up. Minji was standing at the foot of the bed. He had not moved during the last 2 hours. She had been aware of him as a constant, present at the rail when she needed the rail, stepping back when the medical team needed the space, always findable when she looked. He hadn't spoken much. He hadn't needed to. His presence had been its own kind of communication, the specific language of someone who understood that the most useful thing they could do was not leave. He was looking at Elijah. His face was... She didn't have a word for it. She had seen him surprised before. She had seen him stripped of his armor. She had seen him with wet eyes on a sidewalk in November. This was none of those things. This was something that came from below all of that, from somewhere that had no defense because it had never been armored in the first place. He looked undone. Completely and quietly undone. "Come here," she said. He crossed to the side of the bed. He looked at Elijah with an expression she would never entirely be able to describe and would never forget. "You can hold him," she said. "My hand, your other hand is fine. Come here." The neonatal nurse helped him position his arm. The undamaged one, crooked and careful. She placed Elijah into the cradle of it. Minjae's whole body went still in the way she'd seen before. The battery removal. But longer this time, and deeper. He looked down at Elijah. Elijah, who had stopped crying approximately 30 seconds ago, and was now looking up at the new face above him with the unfocused intensity of a person who has just received more information than their processing capacity can handle and is doing their best anyway. Minji's face broke. Not dramatically. Not the way faces break in performances of grief or joy. The way faces break when something real happens to them, and there's no performance left to give. Just the face, doing the thing it does when the feeling is bigger than the architecture built to contain it. He didn't make a sound. His eyes were wet, and then they were past wet, and he held his son with his one good arm and looked at him, and Amara watched him and said nothing, because nothing she could have said would have been more than noise. After a long moment, Min-jae looked up. His eyes met hers. "Thank you," he said. His voice was barely there, rough and real. She shook her head. "Don't thank me." "I know. I can't help it." She looked at her son in his arms. "He needs a NICU check. They'll want him for monitoring." "I know. You can go with him, if you want." He looked at her. "And you?" "I'm not going anywhere." She shifted against the pillow. Every muscle in her body was making its opinions known simultaneously. "I'll be here." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked back down at Elijah. "Okay," he said, so quietly it was almost private. The neonatal nurse came for Elijah. Min-jae followed. Amara lay back against the pillow and looked at the ceiling of the delivery suite and listened to the monitors and let herself finally be completely still. She was still when Dr. Park came to check on her, still when a nurse brought her water and a warm blanket, still when the room quieted and the light shifted to something lower and the hospital settled around her into its particular 4 in the morning version of itself. She was still when she started to cry. It was the first time she'd cried in 6 months. She had not permitted it before now. Not from strength exactly, more from a self-preservation instinct that understood she couldn't afford to come apart and keep running simultaneously. But there was nowhere left to run. There was nothing left to outpace. So she cried. For the 6 months. For the apartment in Mapo and the paper birds and the name Maya Chen on a lease agreement. For the year before that, the year of not knowing the full shape of the life she was inside. For the person she'd been at the start of it, younger in ways that had nothing to do with age, more certain about the clarity of moral lines, less acquainted with the specific cost of loving someone who was also a problem you couldn't solve. For Elijah, who had arrived 8 weeks early and crying into a world that was already waiting for him with complications. For herself, who had done everything wrong and everything right simultaneously, and was still here, and was still her, and was going to have to figure out what happened next. She cried until she was done, and then she wiped her face with the corner of the hospital blanket and closed her eyes. She slept 20 minutes. When she woke, Min-jae was in the chair beside the bed. His damaged hand rested on his knee. His other hand held his phone, dark-screened. He wasn't looking at it, just holding it. He was watching her sleep, or had been, and when she opened her eyes, he didn't pretend he wasn't. "How is he?" she said. "Strong." His voice was rough in a different way than before. The roughness of a man who had held his son for 30 minutes in a NICU and was carrying that in his body. "The team says his lungs are very good for his gestational age. They want to keep him monitored for at least 2 weeks, possibly 3. He paused. "But strong." "Strong," she said. "Yes." She adjusted herself against the pillow. The room was quiet. The window was beginning to gray. Dawn arriving, the city outside starting its slow return to itself. "I need to tell you something," she said, "that I should have told you in the prosecutor's office, or the cafe, or—" She stopped. "Earlier. I should have told you earlier." He waited. "When I found the files," she said, "the server. I told you I was looking for the truth. That was accurate, but it wasn't the whole thing." She looked at him. "I was also scared. Not of you, or not only of you. Scared of what I felt. Scared of how much I had let myself need something that had a shape I couldn't fully see." She paused. "When I found the files, I used them. As a reason. Not the only reason. They were real. The reality of what I found was real, and my anger about it is real. But I was also using them as permission to do what part of me had already decided I needed to do." She looked at her hands. "Run." He said nothing. "I'm not saying that to excuse you," she said. "What you built, what it cost, who it hurt, that's real, and it belongs to you, and it always will. I'm saying it because you have been honest with me about the ways you managed and controlled things, and I owe you the honesty of this. I was not only a victim of your choices. I made choices too. I chose to leave without telling you about Elijah, and some of that was protection, and some of it was—" She stopped. "Punishment." The words sat in the room. Min-jae looked at the window, at the graying sky. He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not respond. Then he said, "I know." She looked at him. "You know?" "I've thought about it for 6 months. Why you didn't tell me?" He looked at her. The protection was real. Your reasons were legitimate, but I knew somewhere in the second or third month of looking for you that there was also something else. Something that was about making me feel what it was like to lose something and have no power over the losing. He paused. I didn't blame you for it. I don't blame you for it. That's not the point. I know it's not. He shifted in the chair. His face, in the early dawn light, looked older than his years and simultaneously younger than she'd ever seen it. The bruising, the cut, the particular openness of total exhaustion. The point is that we both did damage, to each other and to the situation, and Elijah is going to be here, in the world, navigating what we built from it. Yes. So we need to decide what we're building instead. She looked at him. That's not a conversation for 4 a.m. in a hospital. No, he said, it's not. It's a conversation for when I've slept more than 20 minutes, and you've had your hand properly set, and we've both eaten something, and Elijah is stable, and the world is slightly less on fire. Yes. But it's a conversation we're going to have. Yes, he said. It is. She looked at him. I'm not moving back in with you. I know. And forgiveness is a long process. It's not a decision. It's not something I can give you in a hospital room. I know. And you don't get to manage me, ever again. If we are, whatever we are, it is equal or it is nothing. I know. His voice was steady. I agree with all of it. You agree now, in a hospital, at dawn, after the worst night of your adult life. I agreed before the worst night of my adult life, he said. I've been trying to figure out how to rebuild myself into someone who could actually live by it. Not say it, live it. He looked at her. I'm still figuring it out. I won't pretend I've solved it, but I know the direction. She held his gaze. The letter, she said. Something shifted in his face. You don't have to... The 3 sentences, she said, in the middle of the second page. You said, I am not asking you to forgive me because I do not believe forgiveness is something that can be requested. I'm asking you only to let Elijah know that his father spent the last year of his life trying to become someone his son could be honest about. That is the only legacy I want. She paused. Those sentences. He was very still. I want you to know, she said, that those sentences are why I handed you the ultrasound image outside the clinic. She looked at him. I hadn't read the letter yet. I didn't know you'd written anything like that. But when I held out that image, it was because some part of me had already understood that that was who you were trying to be. Before I had proof of it, she paused. I want you to know that, because you should. He pressed his mouth together, looked at the window. His jaw worked. Okay, he said. His voice was not steady. Okay, she said. The dawn continued to arrive. The sky outside the window went from gray to pale gold, the particular early light of a Seoul winter morning that was cold and clear and indifferent to everything, and somehow still beautiful. Elijah came home, to Minji's compound, because Amara's apartment no longer existed in any form, and because 2 weeks in a NICU required proximity to the medical suite, and because some temporary arrangements become something else entirely before anyone has officially decided they have, 17 days after he was born. He was 4 pounds 11 ounces and 3/4 of an inch longer than he'd been at birth, and had demonstrated, in the opinion of the neonatal team, a personality best described as determined. He had his father's stillness and his mother's expression when something displeased him, which was a combination that the nurses found alternately endearing and formidable. Amara carried him in herself. Minjae held the door. The room they had prepared for him, which had started as a bare guest room and had been transformed in the 2 weeks of the NICU stay by a process she'd been only partly aware of while managing her own recovery, had a crib assembled against the wall under a window. Above the crib, a mobile. Paper birds. Different colors. Hung from the same small mechanism as the one she'd taken from the apartment in Mapo and tucked into the side pocket of her bag the night she left. She stopped in the doorway. Minjae was behind her. She heard him stop too. Ji-yeon found the mobile in your bag, he said. When you were in the NICU the first week, I asked someone to... I thought... He paused. I'm sorry if it's... Don't apologize, she said. Her voice was quiet. She was looking at the birds. It's right. She put Elijah in the crib. He looked up at the paper birds with the focused attention of someone encountering something interesting for the first time. She stood with her hands on the crib rail and watched him look at them. Min-jae came to stand beside her. Not touching, just present. "He's looking at them," Min-jae said. Low. "He looks at everything like that, like it's a problem he's working out. He gets that from you." She glanced sideways at him. "He gets the stubbornness from you." Something that was almost a smile crossed his face. Careful and real. Probably. They stood together watching their son look at paper birds in the early afternoon light, and for a few minutes the compound was entirely quiet, and the city beyond the wall was entirely irrelevant, and there was nothing to manage or plan or survive. Just this. Haewon called on a Tuesday in February, 6 weeks after Elijah came home. Amara took the call in the sitting room on the second floor, which she had gradually, without making a formal decision about it, come to think of as her room in a way that the word temporary no longer fully applied to. She had her translation work on the table. She had 2 cups of tea because Min-jae had started appearing at her door around mid-morning on the days he worked from the compound, always with something: tea, food, a document he needed her eye on, occasionally nothing at all, just standing in the doorway for a moment and then going. And she had stopped being surprised by it. Haewon's voice was brisk and satisfied in a way she reserved for good outcomes. "The dissolution is complete. Every asset category has been formally separated, documented, and transferred. The criminal operations are fully wound down. The prosecution's case against Jun Seok and the 2 senior network figures is proceeding with the documentary evidence. There will be a trial, but the outcome is not in question." She paused. "And the legitimacy certification for the remaining businesses, the construction arm, the hospitality group, the import holdings, has been approved by the Financial Regulatory Authority." Amara set down her tea. "All of it. All of it. Kang Min-jae is, as of this morning, the owner and operator of 3 clean, legitimate businesses with no outstanding legal exposure and a formal cooperation record with 2 prosecution teams that will serve him well in any future regulatory inquiry." Another pause. "It's done, Ms. Bennett." She sat with that for a moment. The weight of it. 8 months of work, 3 months of dangerous acceleration, a night in a prosecutor's office, a broken hand, and a baby born 2 months early. All of it converging to this Tuesday morning sentence. "It's done." "Thank you," she said. "Thank his stubbornness," Haewon said, which was the most personal thing Amara had ever heard her say. She ended the call. She sat at the table with her hands around her tea and looked at the courtyard window. The bear tree had started to bud, small and tentative, the first suggestion of green. She had not noticed exactly when it started. She noticed now. She went to find Min-jae. He was in the first floor working room, on the phone, standing at the window in the same posture she'd found him in the first morning she'd come down. Dark sweater, bad coffee, the particular stance of someone who conducts most of their thinking on their feet. He saw her in the doorway, said 2 words into the phone, and ended the call. "Haewon," she said. "I know. She called me first." He looked at her. "I told her to call you next." She nodded. She looked at him, at his face, which had healed in the weeks since that night. The cut resolved to a faint line at his cheekbone that would probably stay. His hand had been properly set and was in a brace he wore with the same stoic indifference he applied to most physical inconveniences. He looked, she thought, like a man who had come through something and was still figuring out what he looked like on the other side of it. She understood that feeling. "How's Elijah?" he said. "Sleeping. He'll be up in 40 minutes and he'll be furious about it, which is his natural state upon waking." She paused. "You can come get me when he wakes up, if you want to be there." He looked at her. "You mean that?" "I said it." Something moved through his face. "Okay." She leaned against the doorframe. The working room looked different than it had in November. Fewer documents, the second monitor dark, the phone that wasn't connected to anything no longer on the table. The infrastructure of crisis, gradually being cleared away. "I've been looking at apartments," she said. He was quiet. "In Seongbuk. Close." She met his eyes. "Not here. My own space. But close enough that logistics are manageable." She paused. "For Elijah. And for whatever this is." "Whatever this is," he said. We haven't named it. No, I don't think we need to name it yet. He looked at her steadily. What do you need from it? From me. Right now. She thought about it honestly. She had been thinking about it for 6 weeks, and the fragments of time that a newborn permitted, which were short but were longer than nothing, which was what she'd had before. Consistency, she said. Not performances of change, just the daily, boring, unglamorous work of being consistent. Showing up when you say you will. Being honest when something is hard instead of managing how it looks. She paused. Being wrong sometimes and saying so without making it into a thing. That last one, he said. I know. It's a specific weakness. I'm aware. Elijah is going to notice everything, she said. Children notice everything and remember it in their bodies even when they can't name it yet. So whatever we are, we have to be honest in front of him. Not perfect. Honest. Yes, he said, simply. She pushed off the doorframe. There's a 2-bedroom in Seongbuk with a second-floor garden. I'm going to look at it Thursday. Do you want company? No. He nodded, a beat. Do you want my opinion on it after? She considered. Maybe. Something that was more than almost a smile this time crossed his face. She went back upstairs. At the window of the sitting room, she could see the courtyard, the budding tree, the patch of winter sky going tentatively blue. She picked up her translation work and settled into the low chair and worked for 35 minutes until she heard Elijah begin his opinion-having process from the next room. First the small sounds, the building announcement, and then the declaration. She set down her work. She got up. She heard Min-jae's footsteps on the stairs before she reached the nursery door. He'd been faster than she expected, or he'd been closer than she'd thought, which was its own kind of information. They reached the door at the same time. He looked at her. She looked at him. She opened the door and went in. He followed. Elijah was lying on his back in the crib, looking at the paper birds with the expression of someone who has woken up and found the world still there and is reserving judgment on whether this is acceptable. His small fists were drawn up near his face. His eyes, dark, enormous, focused with the intensity of someone who had inherited his parents' particular relationship with paying attention, tracked to them as they entered. Min-jae went to the crib. He stood looking down at his son. He reached in with his unbandaged hand and offered his finger. Elijah's hand opened, found it, closed around it with the automatic grip of someone who has decided that what's available is sufficient. Amara stood beside him. She watched Elijah look up at both of them. She thought about a night 6 months ago in a grocery store in Mapo, where she had been talking to herself about iron-rich food, and a woman in the cereal aisle had looked at her with the particular recognition of witnessing someone's private loneliness. She thought about the apartment, the go bag, the notebook, the 40-minute bus rides and the 4-minute wait for hot water, and the life she had built alone with the careful precision of someone who couldn't afford to waste anything. She thought about a clinic doorway and a man who had calculated the distance between himself and who he wanted to be and had started walking it before she'd come back to tell him it was possible. She thought about 3 sentences on the second page of a letter written in low light by someone who expected not to survive to say them out loud. Min-jae was looking at her. She hadn't noticed when he'd looked up from Elijah. He was just looking at her, the way he had always looked at her, like she was the most important piece of information in any room, except that it didn't feel like assessment anymore. It felt like something else, something that had grown into itself over a long winter, slowly and without announcement, the way the tree in the courtyard had been budding while she wasn't watching. Thursday, he said. Thursday, she said. I'll have Ji-yeon available if you need anything. I won't need Ji-yeon. I know. A beat. She'll be available anyway. She looked at him, at the line on his cheekbone, the brace on his hand, the way he was standing. Not the managed posture she'd spent a year reading as authority, but something less composed and more real, the posture of a man who was still figuring out how to stand when he wasn't performing standing. She looked at Elijah, who had closed his eyes again, fingers still wrapped in his fist, the paper birds turning in the warm air above him. He's going to be a lot, she said. You know that. He's going to be questions and opinions and complicated feelings about who you are and what you did. Yes. And you're going to have to answer him every time, honestly. I know. Min-jae looked down at Elijah. His voice was quiet. I've thought about that. What I'll say. How much? When? He paused. I don't have all of it worked out. Neither do I. But you'll tell me, when you think it's time for something. Yes, she said. And you'll tell me. Yes. Elijah made a small sound. Not distress. Just presence. The particular sound of a small person confirming their continued existence. Minjai's hand shifted, his finger still held, and he made a sound back. Low, almost inaudible, the automatic response of a parent who has been in a NICU for 2 weeks, learning the specific language of their child. Amara watched him do it. She watched the most feared man in Seoul's former underworld stand at a crib in a Seongbuk compound with a broken hand and a healing face and talk quietly to a baby who was 4 pounds and 11 ounces and exactly 6 weeks old. She didn't know what the next year looked like. She didn't know what the apartment in Seongbuk would look like from the inside, whether the second-floor garden would be what she hoped, whether the translation work would be enough, or whether she'd need to expand, whether Minjae's businesses would thrive or stumble in their first year of clean operation, whether Junseok's trial would take 6 months or 18, whether she and Minjae would find their way to something nameable, or whether unnamed would be what fit them, whether Elijah would sleep through the night before his first birthday, or whether that particular optimism was the kind that parenthood destroyed quickly. She didn't know any of it. What she knew was this room. This morning. The paper birds turning. The man beside her with his son's hand around his finger. The window where the winter light came in. Her own body, still recovering, still adjusting to what it had done and what it had given and what it had gained. She was tired. She was going to be tired for a long time. She had been through something that did not have a clean ending because life didn't have clean endings. It had continuations, adjustments, the slow work of people trying to be better than what they had been while also being exactly as flawed as they were. She could live with that. She was already living with it. Elijah opened his eyes again, looked at the birds, looked at his father, looked at his mother. He had the expression, she was certain of it, even at 6 weeks, even knowing it was probably too early, of someone who was going to have things to say about all of this as soon as the capacity to say them arrived. She couldn't wait. She reached into the crib and laid her hand over Elijah's, over Minjae's finger that Elijah was still holding. Minjae looked at her hand, then at her face. She looked back at him. Neither of them said anything. The paper birds turned. The tree in the courtyard below was budding. Seoul went about its business beyond the wall, indifferent and enormous and ordinary, the way cities are when private things are resolving inside them. And in the room, the three of them were quiet together. Not the quiet of absence, not the quiet of things unsaid, but the quiet that arrives when the storm has moved through and the ground is wet and the air is clean and everything that was going to break has broken. And what remains is what was always going to remain, the people who stayed, the ones who came back, and the small, fierce life between them that had decided to arrive early and make itself known before anyone was entirely ready. That was the thing about Elijah. He had never waited for permission. He came from people who didn't either.